We're making a showstopper Black Forest chocolate roll cake that's gluten-free and naturally sweetened. It's made with healthier ingredients, including almond and oat flour in the cake, blended cottage cheese in the filling, a fresh cherry filling, and a chocolate chip and milk ganache. Hello, my name is Nicole Bonilla, and if you love healthier recipes to our favorite foods, then you are in the right place. Now you're welcome to jot down these ingredients as we go along, or you can click on the link that's in the video description below, and that will take you to the full recipe with all the details, including nutrition facts, ingredients and substitutions, and frequently asked questions. Now this cake does have several components, but they're all really easy and fun to make. We're going to start by making the chocolate cake. So in our mixing bowl, we're going to add our dry ingredients, which includes 2/3 of a cup of almond flour, 1/3 a cup of oat flour, and 1/4 a cup of tapioca flour. And this is my favorite flour combination because it gives you the most flavor, but I have included some additional flour options and you'll find them in the recipe card in the link in the video description. Then we'll add 1/4 a cup of cocoa powder, 1/2 teaspoon of baking powder, 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda, 1/2 teaspoon of salt, and then we'll just whisk these together until combined. And we'll set this aside. And for the wet ingredients, we're going to start with 3 eggs and 1/2 a cup of cane sugar. You can also use regular sugar if you like. 1/3 a cup of some applesauce. And this gives it moisture and a little flavor. 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract, 2 teaspoons of apple cider vinegar. And then to make this cake extra fluffy and airy, we want to whip this for at least 30 seconds. Hold on to your bowl. And then we'll add in our dry mixture. And I'm going to mix this on low just until combined. And you'll have this thick, gorgeous, and very good smelling cake batter. Now to bake the cake, you'll want to use a jelly roll pan, which is roughly 15 inches long and 10 inches wide. And to make sure our cake comes out of the pan very easily, you'll want to line it with parchment paper. And this is very different than wax paper or foil. And then I'll just score it down inside. And then for a little extra insurance, I am going to spray it with a little bit of nonstick. So I'm just going to use some coconut oil. And then we can just pour in our batter. We want to spread it out as evenly as we can. And then we'll spread that out in our spatula, making sure to get it up into the corners. Now, if you could use more healthy inspiration on a regular basis, I invite you to join my email list. All you have to do is click on the link in the description, and that is the best way for us to stay connected. And then once we have it spread out, we're going to hold on to our parchment paper and give it a little shimmy, which helps to make sure it's spread out nice and even. And then we'll give it a few taps on the counter to remove the air bubbles. And then this is ready to go into a 350-degree oven for 12 minutes. So while our cake is in the oven, we'll go ahead and make our filling. And I love using cottage cheese for the health benefits and the protein boost. And we're going to whip it smooth so there's no curdle texture. So in the chopper cup of my immersion blender, I'm adding 3/4 of a cup of cottage cheese. Now, if you open up your container of cottage cheese and there's some extra moisture on the top, go ahead and pour that off into your sink before you measure out your cottage cheese, because we want to minimize any excess liquid in the filling. And to help it set, we're going to add 2 tablespoons of just some room temperature butter. And for a little flavor kick, we'll add a teaspoon of lemon juice and 2 pinches of salt and a teaspoon of vanilla extract. And then we'll blend this until we no longer see the curdled texture. Well, that looks great. And now we can add in 1/2 a cup of powdered cane sugar. You could also use regular powdered sugar if you like. And since the powdered sugar puts us at capacity for my container, I'm going to go ahead and just use my whip attachment on my immersion blender and take out the blade and then just whip it till smooth. And then we're just going to let this hang out in the fridge until we need it. Now, as soon as our cake comes out of the oven, we want to roll it up so that it will hold its shape. So we need to have our towel ready to go. So I'm just spreading a thin kitchen towel on my counter. So I'm just going to tap my sieve and it gives me a really light little dusting of powdered sugar. And this is ready for our cake as soon as it comes out of the oven. Well, our cake just came out of the oven and it smells so good. Now we want the top of the cake to be on the outside of our roll. So we need the top of the cake to be facing the towel. So what we're going to do is very carefully, we're going to turn our hands over on the pan, make sure the oven mitt is out of the way, and then we're going to flip it over very quickly. And we can very carefully lift off our parchment paper, which comes off beautifully since we sprayed it with a little nonstick. And then we're going to start rolling it up from the short end. So I'm just going to put the towel up and over. And then as we're rolling it, we don't want to roll it super tight, but we're just going to kind of gently let the cake tell us how firm it wants to be rolled. Now, as the cake cools, it's going to set in this rolled shape, which will keep it from cracking once we add our fillings. So I'm just going to place it on a cooling rack, and I'll just let it cool on the counter for about maybe 10 or 15 minutes. And then I'm going to put it into the fridge and let it cool completely for maybe a couple hours. So if you want, you could cook your cake the night before or even the morning of to give it plenty of time to cool. You could also put it into your freezer for maybe 30 minutes if you need to speed that up. Now for the layer of cherry filling we're going to put inside the roll cake, you have two options. You could either buy a jar of some cherry jelly from the store that you like, which will save you some time, or you can make this really easy cherry compote, which I think is the most delicious option and definitely the freshest. So we're going to start with 2 cups of either fresh or frozen cherries. If you use the frozen, I went ahead and just put this in the microwave for about 2 minutes just to help speed this up. So let's add this to our pan over medium to low heat. And then we're going to add 3 tablespoons of some cane sugar. You could use regular sugar if you like. Next we'll add a teaspoon of vanilla, 1 teaspoon of lemon juice, 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt. And we'll just give this a good stir. And then we'll just let this simmer for about 5 minutes or until those cherries are nice and soft. Now since I did put this in the microwave for a couple minutes before putting it in my pan, that helps the cherries defrost a little bit quicker. And if you're using fresh cherries, you may need to increase the simmer time to about 10 minutes. And while that's simmering, we're going to take a bowl and just add 1 tablespoon of water and a tablespoon of cornstarch, and then we'll just stir this together till it's dissolved. And then we can just set this aside. And you'll know your cherries are done when you can mash them easily with your spatula. Now you can leave these cherries chunky, but I like to blend it down so it's a little bit smoother. So I'm just going to use my chopper cup and very carefully pour this down inside, blend it till smooth, and then pour it back into our pan, and then bring it to a low simmer, and then pour in our dissolved cornstarch slurry. And then we're going to stir this fairly consistently over the next about 3 or 4 minutes as it thickens. As soon as it thickens to a nice jelly consistency, we can go ahead and turn off our heat. And then to help it cool off quickly, I'm going to pour it into a shallow dish and spread it out nice and thin. Now you want to let this cool down on your counter for about 5 minutes, and then it can go into either the fridge or the freezer, depending on how much time you have to cool it down quickly. Now that our cake and our cherry filling have cooled, we can layer our roll cake. We're just going to very gently unroll our cake. You can see how it's cooled in this nice curved shape. And it's okay if you do get any little splits in the cake on the inside, because they are not going to show, because they will be filled with cherry and filling. That is gorgeous. So the first thing we want to do is add our cherry layer, and we'll just gently spread this all over the cake. Now to add on our cream layer, I find it works really well to pipe it on and then spread it with our spatula. So I've folded down the top and I'm just adding this to a sandwich bag. And then we can easily just start spreading this back and forth across our cherry layer. And after rinsing the cherry off our spatula, we can come back in and just kind of slide back and forth, which will make it nice and even. And I don't push it too far towards the open end because it will start to scooch a little bit as we roll our cake. But I will gently push it up into the center. All right, now we can gently start rolling our cake back up. And we're going to use our towel to help lift it. And we'll roll it until our seam side is on the bottom. And once we have it rolled up all the way, I'm just going to wrap my towel back around it. And then you could wrap this in some plastic wrap, or I find it works just as well to just keep it in the towel. And then I'll just let this hang out in the freezer while we prep our ganache and other toppings. Now we have 4 different components that we're going to use to finish off the top of our roll cake. We're going to make some chocolate shavings. We're going to add fresh cherries. You can either use store-bought whipping cream or we can whip our own. And then we're going to make our chocolate ganache. So we'll start by making our whipped cream. I'm just adding 1/2 cup of heavy whipping cream to my bowl and 1/4 cup of some powdered cane sugar and 2 pinches of salt. And then I'll just whip this on high until we have those stiff peaks. And that looks perfect. And then I'm just going to let this hang out in the fridge until we're ready to pipe the top. Now to make this really easy ganache that we're going to pour over the cake, we're just going to start with 1/2 cup of your favorite chocolate chips. And then we're going to melt these down in 30-second intervals in our microwave, stirring in between. After 3 rounds of 30 seconds, our chocolate is melted, and I stirred it in between each 30 seconds. So let's give this a good stir. Now we're going to add 3 tablespoons of milk, and you could use any variety that you like. We do want the milk to be at least room temperature or just a touch warm before we stir it in. And I'm just going to put this in the microwave for about 20 seconds just to take off the cold edge. Now the milk is no longer cool, we can go ahead and pour this in with our chocolate. And we'll just stir this together. Just be patient because it will become nice and smooth. Now we're going to let this sit for a couple minutes while we make our chocolate curls. Now this is optional, but it's really fun to add those little curls on top of the cake. So all you need is to take your favorite candy bar. I just have a Hershey bar here, and then a vegetable peeler, and then you're just going to turn your bar on its end, and you're just going to go very slowly and shave off these very adorable curls of chocolate. And you can make them as thin or as long or as short as you like. I took my cake out of the freezer, and now we want to get it onto our serving platter. So we're going to go ahead and unroll our cake. I'm going to put my cake onto a cutting board. And then to get a nice clean edge, I'll come in with my knife and just kind of cut off about 1/2 inch. We'll carefully lift this up and onto our plate. And I will make good use of those ends. And then we'll come in with our chocolate and just pour it right over the top. And I love how it just loosely drizzles down both sides of the cake. And then we will need to let this chocolate set before we can pipe on our whipped cream on top. So this is going back into my freezer for about 10 minutes. Well, here's our cake out of the freezer after a few minutes, and the top is now set. And I've got my whipped cream into my piping bag, and I'm just giving it a nice big star tip. And then I'm just going to pipe on about 6 dollops across the top of the cake. Make a nice big circle and up in the middle. Oh, that's beautiful. And then we'll come in with our fresh cherries, and we'll put one in the middle of each dollop. Oh, that's so cute. And last but not least, we can come in and add some of our little curly chocolates. Now we have this gorgeous cherry cake that is ready for any special occasion. And then it's ready to slice and enjoy. That is seriously divine. That is just a smooth blend of the most incredible flavors. First, you get that sweet chocolate ganache on the outside, and then you go into that nice spongy cake. And then you get this delicious cherry flavor that isn't overly sweet and actually tastes like real cherries. And then you get that creamy filling that's just really smooth and delicious. And what I love most is that it's made with clean, natural ingredients, which means I'm gonna feel just as good even after I eat it. And on the recipe link, I include lots of options for making it dairy-free as well. Well, thank you so much for joining me today in my kitchen. I've included the link to the full recipe, and it's in the video description below, and that will take you to my website, gentletummy.com. And I invite you to like and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and I look forward to having you join me again in my kitchen.